Hello, uh, welcome to Comraton Kalios. I understand I am the first presenter, so I have that interesting honor to kick things off. And I have been invited to come and talk about the Underworld. So here we have it in Gothic, as we refer to it in SRS, which is the Gothic tradition I am a member of. So that's Hanawang. Um, and then we'll talk about it in a few other things. But yeah, the underworld, the deep and the dark. So, for those who don't know, I am Snow, also known as Gesa Leaks. I am a co-host of Around Grandfather Fire, co-administrator of the Skid Discord server, which is a heathenry Discord server connected to the Longship and the heathenry subreddit. I am a member of SRS, as I said, assistant moderator for the Troth, a member of Asatru UK, a Kemetic polytheist, a hermeticist, a Stoic, astrologer. I do my own blogging and writing and make my own devotional music. I do a lot of things while simultaneously feeling like I don't do a lot of things and then getting told off when I say I don't do a lot of things. So, what we're going to try and cover today is the underworld. So, what is it? Where is it? What's it like? Who lives there? Maybe address some misconceptions, maybe trace some existing ideas to all the sources, explore interactions between location and inhabitant, the idea of as above, so below, the different realms connecting, the different realms mirroring each other, and question ideas of borders and boundaries and how solid, fixed, or otherwise they may or may not be. So, as the Gauls present will know, TG, on your wonderful website, the underworld, colloquially known as the Deep or Dumnos, where the chthonic gods like Nantos Welter, Sukelos reside, and the potentially malevolent Anderoi, which is those below. It's the place of mystery, of darkness, of power, the forces of Giamos. The ancient Gauls would view deep shafts or bodies of water as entrances to the underworld. Um, and you see some of these ideas appear in a lot of folklore. The ideas of people falling down wells, the ideas of canyons, of caves, things of that nature, very much being representative of the underworld and worlds below. So anecdotal observations. In my time in pagandom and in polytheistic communities, we see a few different things that I made notes of that I thought would be interesting to bring up and address. So when it comes to the underworld, when it comes to the inhabitants of the underworld, we often get ideas of earth spirits or elemental spirits. And this sort of has the idea of the inhabitants of the underworld being like other kinds of spirits. So you can have a relationship there. They might be part of a given deity's retinue, so a follower or a servant, or in the chain of a given god, goddess, etc. Or they may well be independent beings with their own autonomy, their own agendas, their own moral and ethical compasses. Uh, there is the idea of corruptions of the gods from ANE cultures, so the ancient Near Eastern cultures. So we're talking Egypt, we're talking Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Babylon, etc. Um, and here we have a few issues as I see them. So whilst at times this can be proven, if you think of things like Lilith and the connection to Lilitu in Mesopotamia, Babylon, etc., it does bring up conversations around appropriation, who has access to address and interact with and talk about these different beings from different cultures. It can often imply linguistic connections, bringing identical semantic meanings. So what that is words being connected etymologically, linguistically, may be mean the same thing in different contexts or when applied to different things. We get the idea of fallen angels. So this is very much a Jewish, Christian, and or Muslim view, that because of the sort of rise and the spread of Islam and Christianity in the late ancient period, the medieval periods, and the Renaissance found its way into many magical, esoteric, and occult circles, and as a result has found itself in modern day pagandom and occultdom, for better or worse. Um, there's this idea of the inhabitants of the underworld being miscellaneous, malicious beings. So here we sort of often get this idea of earth or elemental spirits, but it adds that moral or ethical element there where they are malicious, they're intentionally uh, or perhaps unintentionally harmful, likely to do ill, likely to bring problems, something to be warded off, something to be um, guarded against, often feared. Um, we have this idea of misunderstood millennious beings who are amoral or morally neutral. Um, so often this can reinforce ideas of Islam, Christianity, etc., being something of a colonizing force that sought to overwrite the understandings of spirits, gods, and other sort of divine and numinous beings in various regions at various eras and sort of vilify them, shun them. Often you see this discussed in Celtic circles when people are talking about the fairies or the dwellers of the mounds being gods who are sort of chased underground, that kind of idea. And we see this sort of arise sometimes in conversations about underworlds. And also we get the idea that the inhabitants of underworlds are simply fictional and often used as threats or warnings, um, which, as I've put here, personally, I think can often lead to atheist materialist rhetoric, where it's kind of once you start saying those things don't exist, where does that sort of stop? But also that idea of if you do wrong, such and such a being, such and such a spirit will come and harm you. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam is where a lot of contemporary ideas come from. So we have a quote here from the Book of Job, which is Jewish, and we have a quote here from the Quran. So here in the Book of Job, my days are few, so desist. Leave me alone. Let me be diverted a while before I depart, never to return for the land of deepest gloom, a land whose light is darkness, all gloom and disarray, whose light is like darkness. So we have this idea that I think has very much been continued into Christianity or picked up by Christians later on, that through modern Christian and post-Christian society and the overculture has found its way in pagan circles as people seek to address and recognize their Christian baggage or their post-Christian baggage, and this idea of this land of deepest gloom, a land that only knows darkness, gloom, and disarray, and that idea of an underworld being like that. And here in the Quran, we have here, soon I will burn him in hell. What will make you realize what hell is? It scorches the skin, doesn't let anyone live or die. Overseen by 19 keepers, the stern angels as wardens of the fire. Their number is a test for the disbelievers. So here we have very much this idea of hell as a punishment. Hell is very much something to be avoided and feared. Um, and that's very much how we see the underworld being portrayed here, which again, I think in sort of modern pagandom, we have these ideas bleeding through from the sort of monotheistic overculture. So if we go right back into the distant polytheistic past, one place we could start to look at this would be Egypt. So we have Sekhet Aru and we have the Duat. So we have this lineage of unbroken religious funerary magical texts going right back to roughly the 24th century BCE, with the pyramid texts through to the coffin texts, through to the Book of Coming Forth by Day, um, or better known as the Book of the Dead, through to the magical papyri around the first century-ish. Um, and we can see in these different ideas of the underworld, very, very different. So here the Duat, which is often sort of translated into English as Underworld, but it's a realm where Osiris lives, where Anubis lives, where Thoth and Horus, Hathor and Maat live. So very much a place of gods and goddesses and those who would be worshipped. So already we have something of a contrast here. And again, Sekhet Aru, we have this field of reeds. So 21 gates of the house of Osiris, the realm again of Osiris, Nephthys, Isis, Horus, Set. And so here also you can see evidence in this polytheistic religion that we have gods dwelling in more than one place and this multiplicity and plurality existing. And because these are places of gods, and this idea of a field, that's already quite the stark contrast to modern ideas of this place of torment and torture and pain and suffering, as far as a sort of underworld or a realm of the dead or an quote unquote other world may be. So the weighing of the heart. So I've taken this from Polyphanes purely because I thought he had a rather sort of articulate summary of this, but you can find this in plenty of places. So the way that he phrased it, upon dying, the soul of the deceased is led from its body and set on a perilous path through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, culminating in being led by Anubis into the presence of Osiris to be judged. The judgment would consist mostly of having the heart of the deceased weighed on a scale against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth itself. If the heart is at least as light as the feather, then the soul was judged to be pure and was admitted into the afterlife of the righteous. If, however, the heart was heavier than the feather, then the heart of the deceased would be devoured by the fearsome beast Amit, condemning the dead to die a second time, and never being permitted to the true afterlife, and instead forever being a restless and wandering spirit. So here we have something of a sense of a moral judgment or an ethical judgment. We have something of a reflective or evaluative situation where people are looking back on their lives, or the gods are looking back on the given life of a mortal, considering things, deciding whether someone does or doesn't get granted passage into the underworld, the realm of the afterlife, the dwelling place of the dead, to be with the gods, to be with ancestors, and so on. And this idea of being devoured, this is something you actually see Egyptologists sort of debate a little, where either they are left restless and wandering, or they simply cease to exist, and it's almost as if they never did exist. So arguably a fate worse than sort of eternal torment and suffering is just completely being nullified, sort of absolutely nothingness, almost like you've been deleted from existence, which is similar to an idea we'll get to later. And again, in ancient Egyptian religion, we have these different parts of the self, the soul matrix, however you want to describe it. So when we're talking about what exactly it is that enters the underworld when an individual dies, um, we have these different parts of the individual, the heart, one's identity, one's reputation, one's life force, and so on, which again is something of a contrast to modern Christian or post-Christian ideas of what it is that dies, what it is to be a self, what an individual is, and how much of one progresses into an underworld or an afterlife, and how much of one is left sort of in this sort of middle realm, this physical dwelling place that we're all in now. So when we're talking about the inhabitants of the underworld and who dwells there, the word demon will pop up again and again and again. And I quite liked this quote from Lucarelli. So in ancient Egyptian religion, Lucarelli is saying the main difference between demon and deity seems to be that demons receive no cult, at least until the New Kingdom. Within the hierarchy of supernatural beings, demons are subordinate to the gods. Although they possess special powers, these powers are not universal, but rather limited in nature and scope. In general, their influence is circumscribed to one single task, and in certain cases, they act under the command of a deity. The available sources do not elaborate on the origin of demons, nor are they explicitly mentioned in creation accounts. However, as they often act as emissaries of deities and are subjected to their will, we may deduce that demons are a creation of the gods. And I think that's a really interesting differentiation between demons and deities, and some of these ideas of demons being subordinate to the gods, very localized, limited in nature, in scope, um, being emissaries of the deities, subject to their will. We see these ideas when people talk about whites in a particularly heathen context, or when people talk about regional spirits, local spirits, once you start talking about the animistic elements of Gaulish polytheism, Celtic polytheism, etc. Um, and you also see some of these ideas potentially, arguably, influence ideas of angels in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which again bled through into the medieval Renaissance occult circles and the occult leading into what we have now in this kind of Venn diagram of modern day paganism and modern day occultism. Um, but again, in ancient Greek religion, angel literally means messenger. So here we have in ancient Egypt demons as emissaries of deities. So we have a similar idea there. Um, so yeah, the dead, the dark, the dangerous. We're talking demons, daimones, ghosts, the restless dead, ancestors, gods, elemental spirits, these different ideas of who may inhabit the underworld, who may be going to the underworld, potentially who may be coming from the underworld, because you open a door, that goes two ways, right? Um, and then Mather's infamous sort of occultist, the word demon is evidently employed almost as a synonym of devil, but as most educated people are aware, it's derived from the Greek daimon, which anciently simply meant any spirit, good or bad. And if we look at ancient Greek religion, we see the word daimon being used like that, where it is literally spirit. So you often hear the word agathodaimon, so that would be the good spirit, and then kakodaimon for an evil or a malicious spirit. If you think about your modern fantasy role-playing games, Cacodemon, sort of similar etymology there. Um, and it's in a similar way to, again, I mentioned the word white earlier, where white is literally any being, um, which you see used in heathenry and Germanic spaces. So I've mentioned Greek stuff, so let's talk Greece for a bit. So uh, Domos Eidau Theoi Chtonioi. I apologize if anyone here does speak Greek for that, but Chthonic gods. So we have the prison of the Titans, said to be as far beneath Hades as the earth lies beneath heaven, which is from Homer's Iliad. And so we have Hades here as the realm, but also Hades, who is the god who presides over the realm, and is described as distinct from Tartarus, which is the prison of the Titans. Um, and we have the halls of Hades and Persephone. For those of you familiar with that mythic cycle where Persephone is here in spring and summer with Demeter, and then descends into the underworld to be with her husband and rule alongside Hades in the realm of Hades. We see Nyx, Hypnos, and Thanatos. So that's night, sleep, and death residing within these underworlds. And of course, if we're talking night, we're talking sleep, we're talking death. Those are significant forces, significant gods in mythology, in life. And so the underworld connection there makes sense. They're being chthonic. We see the epithets chthonios and chthоnia. So oftentimes, especially if people are new to paganism, new to polytheism, you have this idea of God of X, God of Y. So Zeus is a god of thunder, and that's all Zeus is. Thor is a god of, I mean, again, thunder, but Thor with the hammer or Odin with the raven, and that's simply all that they are. And here, if we look at Greek religion, we can see all these different sides of different gods, all these different facets here. So these epithets are applied to gods to show a chthonic aspect of them or them in their chthonic form, however you choose to interpret that. So we have Hermes Chthonios, so a chthonic Hermes, a sort of Mercury of the underworld, if you want me to put that into sort of Roman terms. Demeter Chthoniia, Hecate Chthoniia, Zeus Chthonios. So um, someone who wanted to look into reconstruction or look into syncretism could perhaps consider all these different facets and aspects of different gods and goddesses there. We see Charon, who is the boatman ferrying the dead across the Styx and the other rivers there. We have the psychopompoi, so the psychopomps, conductors of the soul, psyche. So those who are taking the dead to the underworld, finding the restless dead and helping them to be at rest. We see the river Lethe, so mortals drinking the water of this river to forget their lives. So if they lived a particularly troubling life, or if they died in a particularly unpleasant manner, drinking the rivers of this water would help them to forget that, put their mind at ease, and then they could find rest in the underworld. So from theoi.com, which is a great website if anyone is interested in properly looking into Greek stuff. So in the Odyssey, the realm of Hades is described in greater detail. It was located at the ends of the earth on the far shore of the earth-encircling river Okeanos, beyond the gates of the sun and the land of dreams. The land of the dead was enclosed by the Limnae Acherusios, I apologize again, and the three rivers, the Styx, Kokitos, and the Periphlagathon. Pause for a bit of a run up at that one. A judge named Minos received the dead from Hermes Psychogogos and sentenced the most wicked to eternal torment. So here we see something of a little bit of everything we've mentioned so far here. So sentencing to eternal torment. So again, we have this sort of moral or ethical element being applied to the underworld and entry into the underworld, inhabiting the underworld. And this judgment upon death. But we also have the realm of Hades being on the far shore of this river, beyond the gates of the sun and the land of dreams, enclosed by these rivers. So that potentially almost has a kind of a piece to it, but this sort of whether one understood that as a serene, beautiful piece, or whether that one understood that as a sort of Gothic, eerie piece would be open to debate depending on what one was drawing from. And we also see here something that pagans in recent years seem to be looking into more and more as the academia of these kinds of topics is getting taken more and more seriously, and more papers are emerging here of mystery traditions. So often people engage with mystery cults for a given purpose, so to extend their life, or perhaps to be able to retain some sense of who they are in this reality, in this realm, when entering the underworld or after death, or be able to come back or what have you. And we see this influencing the way people are interacting with death, and often sort of reenacting myths of Hades and Persephone there. So some more sort of quotes here talking about this. So, most commonly, a separation is made between the gods above and the gods below. So, the superni and the inferni, as they are called in Latin. The former are referred to as heavenly or celestial, which is Olympian, ethereal or astral. The latter as chthonic, which means of the earth, or catachthonic, below the earth, so belonging to the underworld. Among those below are the dead that ancient authors sometimes refer to the celestial gods and chthonic daemons, where daemons means something like ghosts, but they include also the gods who rule over the dead as the gods above rule over us. And this is from Serios. And I think it's interesting here as well, where we are drawing a distinction between chthonic as of the earth and catachthonic, meaning below the earth. So if you think about the grass growing out of a field and then the roots way deep down into the soil, it's sort of an interesting extra layer to this discussion here. And here daemons is being understood as being ghosts rather than um and sort of the question of are we understanding that as being different to spirits? So the dividing line between terrestrial and chthonic gods is very blurry. That blurriness is not necessarily a problem, but if we seek some clarification, we can do worse than follow the philosopher Olympiodorus, who says that among the terrestrial ones, some are rulers of regions, others keepers of cities, some again are domestic, i.e., of the household. There's no straightforward word for underworld in Greek or Latin, and so neither an adjective derived from it, but the term chthonic carries a fairly strong association with the house of Hades. Gods below the earth can be expressed by hypogagioi, hypochthonioi, and katachthonioi. So again, we have this idea of above sort of level, if you like, and below that. And again, regions, cities, domestic. So we're talking different spheres here, of the household and outwards, or sort of the cosmos and the realms and inwards. So when it comes to worshipping the chthonic, and I think we see this in ancient Greek religion really well, ancient Roman religion really well, and this is being drawn from to inform Germanic and Celtic influenced polytheists in modern day paganism. So depending on the context, deities related to the underworld and ancestors may need to be worshipped separately. This is strictly the case in context with the Hellenic gods when it's important to never share a drink or food with underworld deities like Hades. They get all of it, and where the offering placed to the underworld gods is separate. So Kay Busma said, a few years ago when researching whether I could have my ancestors at the same shrine as my ancestral household gods, I learned that in many ritual liturgies for Norse gods, ancestors are toasted in the same ritual as gods, and many practitioners put them together on shrines. Separation is relative. Use a low shelf or a floor or a place on the floor that you put up and take down as needed, removing the items to a box when not in use. One could use a wooden yoga block as a floor table to hold the ritual items, a cutting board with raised feet, or even the storage box. You could even convert a wall where you display dead family members' photographs to an ancestor area simply by adding a small console table and a place for a candle and flowers. It's advised to move photographs of the living elsewhere. My main household shrine, I pray to household goddesses and ancestors during the final few days of the lunar calendar. At a small meditation table that is low to the ground, I have a shrine for underworld gods. I worship the Erinyes, Hades, Persephone, Hel, and Erekura. If I didn't have a history of worshipping the Erinyes, I could just do a pop-up shrine for specific underworld gods as needed at the end of the month and on special evenings. The waning moon into the dark moon is an excellent time to connect with underworld gods and ancestors, as are times of your life when you are in mourning. And so I think it's worth considering here, drawing upon this Hellenic precedent. And also we see it in Roman stuff, so a Roman precedent as well. A separation of photos of the living and photos of the dead, and how we offer and give worship to deities connected to the chthonic and the underworld compared to how we would give offerings and give worship to deities connected to this world or above worlds. And this idea of not binding oneself to the underworld or not connecting the living as represented as in photographs of loved ones and such with those of the dead, because bad things could potentially happen there. And I won't go too much into this. You can see here widely debated across Hellenic philosophy. So we have different ideas of what exactly the person is made up of. So which exact parts of oneself go to the underworld, which exact parts go here, which exact parts perhaps receive sort of a theurgic unity with divinity, widely debated here. So I would encourage anyone to look further into those if they are at all interested. And so, as Kay Bursma mentioned, Norse stuff, and given I'm primarily known for my association with heathenry, and we're gonna bring this in towards Germanic stuff and progress into Gothic stuff, let's talk Norse things. So, nine realms, as many people will be familiar with. So we have Asgard, Vanaheimr, Alfheimr, Midgard, Jötunheimr, Muspelsheimer, Svartalfheim, Niflheim, Nidavellir. Um, Niflheim is sometimes known as Hell. That's widely discussed and debated because they are referred to in different ways in different texts, the Eddas and Sagas, and some people also prefer to use one term over the other to avoid confusion between the name of the realm and the name of the deity, similar to how we see in Greek with Hades and Hades. And then all of these nine realms are held up in place on Yggdrasil, the world tree, upon whose top we have eagles nibbling at the leaves. There are horses, and at the roots of Yggdrasil we have Nidhogr, who devours the inhabitants of Nastrond, which is in hell. And we have an idea here of Nidhogr devouring those who are judged negatively, harshly, however you want to phrase that. So we have a moral and ethical element here. And whether they are sort of chewed upon for all eternity, or whether Nidhogg devours them, and we have this repeat idea of basically being zeroed out of existence, is something that is discussed both amongst academics and contemporary heathens. Um, so a quote from the Vlusper. This is taken from Petit's translation, which is freely available online for people who are wanting to look it up. So we have it here in both Old Norse and English. So she saw a hall standing far from the sun on Nastrond. The doors face north. Venom drops fell in through the roof vent. That hall is wound with the spines of snakes. There she saw wading swift currents, perjured people, and murder wolves, and the one who seduces another's wife. There, Nidhogg sucked the corpses of the deceased. The wolf tore men. And we have the rhetorical, would you know still more, or what? And so something here of there's a bleakness to it, there's a harshness to it, but like much of the Old Norse texts, it's very blunt, it's very matter of fact when describing these things, because this is just viewed as another part of life. So whether one chose to fear this or whether one chose to accept this would be up for debate, down to individuals perhaps, but it is a part of the cosmos and to be considered. And so if one were to dwell upon the ethical and moral implications or of this being a consequence for how one lived one's life, then perhaps that what might guide one's actions, words, deeds, etc. So taking this from the Longship, we have the term white, which refers to all of the different entities in heathen mythology and worldview, including gods and humans. When modern heathens normally speak of whites, they are usually referring to elves, dwarves, land spirits, house spirits, etc. Beliefs and practices regarding these whites usually vary by individual heathen. Some heathens are sensitive to the presence of whites, while other heathens can barely sense them. Regardless, all heathens are encouraged to honor the existence of house and land whites, which are the spirits that reside in the dwellings and properties we claim as our homes. So again, here we have what is a very broad term, but in the modern day, we are using it to basically refer to a miscellaneous other. So we're often talking in terms of we have gods, we have humans, we have ancestors, which are often humans who have died, dead humans, basically. And then white is anything and everything else. So if one took a particularly animistic view, then all these physical objects here, the desk, the microphone, the computer screen, etc., are whites or are inhabited by whites or are presided over by whites. But we also have ideas here of elves, dwarves, and potentially other mythical or folkloric beings being whites. And again, different views as to what exactly constitutes the self. Lík, ond, hamr, solar, hugger, moder, sefar. We see debate here. I've seen lists go on much longer than this as to what exactly constitutes parts of the Norse idea of the self. Um, I believe Winifred Hodge Rose's works on her website. There are pages and pages with much longer lists than these 7 parts here. Sarah Odinson has written at length on his website as well about this. Um, but we get these different ideas. So the physical body remaining here, decaying, returning to the earth, the elements returning to their source, and then different parts of the self, of the soul, of one's personality, one's identity, going on to receive veneration as an ancestor for those who come after, but also potentially going on to live in different realms of different gods. So this brings us to Sidious Riderie Saulis and Hanawangs, which literally means the abundant meadow. So in forming and creating SRS, Sunareda, who is our founder, drew a lot from Greek precedent, Roman precedent, Norse precedent, and took a very broad overview of where and when the Gothic peoples lived, who they may have interacted with, and how their views, practices, and religion may have developed in a sort of what if scenario of what if Christianity hadn't happened to them. And that's kind of what we run with as Gothic heathens in SRS. Other forms of Gothic heathenry are available. Um, so for us, Lachoatho presides over Hanawangs upon her throne, and she has epithets and titles such as Queen of the Underworld, Queen of the Abundant Meadow, which would be comparable to a sort of chthonic Aphrodite if you want to look at it through the lens of interpretatio. And again, for those unfamiliar, interpretatio does not mean is the same as, but rather is like. So we're comparing X and Y to try and help people understand something using a familiar reference point rather than treating them as equivalences or synonymous. Lachawathel carries the deceased across the waters to the Western Isles, so she has this psychopomp characteristic feature aspect to herself. And we have this view of rivers leading to and connecting to Chanawangs. And rivers are the domains of Donaus and Aqua. So we have here again this idea of shafts, holes, wells, etc., the depths connecting to the underworld. So the underworld may be a mythical place rather than somewhere one could physically venture to, but we view physical depths as symbolic, as representative of this, and the depths of rivers, sources of rivers, waterfalls, etc., connecting to this idea of an underworld. So in SRS, we have 6 parts of the self. So we have the leek, the body, hooks, mind, machts, which is life force or might or power, ability, bergia, which is a divine guardian or a keeper, achma, soul, spirit, ghost, white, and metons, which is reason, thought, opinion, deliberation. We often talk in terms of the metons being what separates humans from other living creatures, sort of drawing upon a similar idea we see in some Hellenistic philosophy that the reasoning faculty, the ability to reason, the ability to make choices is what differentiates animals who are purely driven by instinct and humans who can sort of pause and consider and so on. But again, that's quite a deep philosophical debate for another time, really. So upon death, the Achma separates from the leek. The Achma travels to Hanawangs and resides there, while the Hoogs and Metons die with the leek. Mats persists so long as our names and deeds are remembered. Finally, the Bergia moves around freely, both in Midgard's and across all the worlds. It is the part of us that interacts with the living and receives their prayers and offerings. So we have a part of the self who is venerated by those who come after, those who remember us. We have a part of ourself that exists so long as we are remembered. And we have the parts of ourself that proceed into other realms. So in SRS, we have something of a bifurcated year. So we have the part of the year where Saul is with us, and then the half of the year where Saul is venturing through the underworld. Um, Comparable perhaps with the aforementioned Persephone cycle. Um, so when Saul is departing, we have the wild hunt beginning. So Garth's hunt as the frosts, the darkness, etc. come, leaves go off trees, and so on. Lachawath retreats to her throne in Hanawangs. So she is in mourning of her daughter. She is tending to the dead, etc. Part of Garth's hunt is that he is gathering up the dead and the stray and restless souls, punishing wrongdoers, and so on. Not dissimilar to motifs and ideas we see in other wild hunt concepts in different um, regional folklores and forms of polytheism and paganism. And then particularly relevant holidays, Afarthis, which is the full moon of Saudi Menoths, where we honor Lachawath and the ancestors. We observe her grief and retreat, escorted by Epona and the recently deceased. And Spilaredagos, which is 9 days from the full moon of Fardi Menoths, where we honor Gaft and the ancestors, honoring and observing ancestors, mythical, historical, personal, who shaped our tradition, our lives, and our world. And just for a brief tangent there, for those potentially new to the idea or unfamiliar with the idea, ancestor needn't mean biological predecessor, genealogical predecessor, familial predecessor. It can be anyone who has had an impact upon oneself, who you are, what you do, where you are, how you do what you do, how the things you have come to be, and so on. So anyone of influence or significance, literally, symbolically, materially, philosophically, conceptually, who is a predecessor can be considered an ancestor here. And then there are my references, if anyone is curious. And thank you very much for my presentation. There are links for where you can find me elsewhere. So snowthegoth.com. You can find my music at the cyberforestbleeps.bandcamp.com. You can get my link tree there. And I am happy to answer any questions or take any comments if there happens to be any.
Awesome. All right, let's do some quick questions on the recording. Thank you so much. That was amazing. All right, let's see right
Thank
here.
you. Start
Um,
share. Bum, bum.
yes. So yeah, we have a lot of comments. Any questions? Go ahead and ask them right now. But yeah, we have some uh some sharing. It's I keep forgetting to think about asking question because the presentation is so deliciously dense. Yeah, and if you guys don't come up with anything right now, there is on the Gull Chat Discord, we have unlocked the Kamut and Kalio section, so you can always ask questions there and tag it's the snow with the same profile picture in Gull Chat. There's now two snows in there, so make sure you're tagging the right one. But here's a question:
I
What
am
are
the
your
superior
thoughts?
one.
What are your thoughts on the guardian of the dead type role, such as Hell?
Yeah. So those who are tending to the dead, those who are protecting the dead, caring for the dead, I think is just as important and valid as those who are doing that for the living, essentially. Um, if we are to consider that life of a sort continues in the underworld as a place of a sort, then there is no reason to think that problems may arise there or may not arise there, depending on how one understood the underworld. Um, because if we are venturing away from this idea of it solely being a place of torment and suffering and pain, but rather another realm in itself as diverse, as varied as this one, as pluralistic as this one, perhaps, where different underworlds can coexist or exist simultaneously, then I see no reason why the dead there could not be cared for in a manner similar to how the living here are, by beings such as Hell, such as Lachawath, such as potentially Hades, depending on whatever Greek text you're reading or studying. Does that answer the question?
We'll see. But in the meantime, there's a question from Andrew, and he asked, I've never heard of SRS before. What is that?
So SRS Sidious Rideye Sawilis is a Gothic heathen tradition started by Sunareda. Um, and yeah, we're sort of drawing from the Gothic peoples, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths of the early medieval period and the ancient period. And the Gothic people spanned from the Iberian Peninsula, so where modern day Spain and Portugal are, right the way through to Crimea in the Black Sea, in Eastern Europe, the Balkans, the Italian Peninsula. So we're looking at a very broad geographical area. Depending on what one potentially wanted to focus on more, you could have more of a Roman influence or more of a Hellenistic influence there. But the Goths precede what we understand the Norse to be today, where a lot of quote unquote Viking Age texts appear 5, 6 centuries after what we understand of the Goths to have come from. So it's a modern heathen group, looking at that, drawing upon that, constructing um, what they may have done, pulling ideas and inspiration from that, and then making it work for us in the here and now.
All right. Um, and the next question is, what deities do you see taking part in the rebirth and or reincarnation process?
I mean, that's something that I've often wondered about because I'm not sure if that is something that potentially happens anyways, or if that is something that given deities take sort of more of an active hand in, or potentially both. There is no reason that is an either or. After all, if we're talking polytheism, then inherently multiplicity and plurality are a significant part of that. Um, I I see no reason to think that any deity who was something of a psychopomp or any deity who was something of a creator of sorts could not also be a deity who had a hand in rebirth or reincarnation, because what you're doing there is you're sort of turning a line into a circle. So you're taking life in one form, taking it through death, segueing into birth for another life. And so I think gods whose aspects or functions or domains involve either end of that could come into play there.
All right. Next question. Would the Andernatios, Androi, be more like the daemons then, or a chthonic opposition to the Deivoi?
Hmm. Well, no longer being as enmeshed in Gaulish stuff as I used to be, my knowledge of Andernadios or Anderioi is uh rusty. This is when someone goes, "That's Greek. It's not Gaulish. What are you talking about?" Um, but I do think it's interesting to consider one's understanding of daemon as not necessarily something in opposition to the gods. If we're talking spirits, if we're talking ghosts, if we are understanding daemon as this kind of modern, often occult influenced, often very post-Christian idea of demon, um, where there is something of a moral and ethical quality to that, I don't think they are necessarily in opposition to the gods, because we do see chthonic gods, as I sort of talked about in my presentation earlier. And I don't think the gods of the underworld are necessarily in conflict with the gods of a sort of overworld, upperworld, heaven type realm, if you like. Um, but rather, if we take a broad view of daemons as spirits, talking in terms of whites, um, then they could be as vast, as varied, as complicated as, say, humans are. And you could have gods presiding over them. You could have potentially some of them being indifferent to gods, potentially they're following gods. Potentially they worship gods, etc. Um, I don't know how satisfying of an answer that is to that question.
That's quite excellent. All right. Yep. I think that is what we have for questions for right now. If anyone like I said, if anyone comes up with any more questions, go ahead and ask on the Gold Chat Discord in the appropriate channels. We are going to be taking a little 15-minute break and coming back for the formation of personal names in ancient Celtic. Thank you again, Snow. This was fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I am happy to have been invited. And thank you for everyone who came and saw and watched.
All right. See you in 15 minutes.
See ya. There we go.